Dr. Elena Vasquez had always found it amusing that beings capable of folding space-time like origami still insisted on delivering bad news, with all the theatrical flair of a soap opera. The Zenthari physician, whose name contained 17 syllables and 3 harmonic frequencies that human vocal cords couldn't reproduce, stood before her with 4 arms crossed in what she'd learned was their species equivalent of "brace yourself for disappointment." "The neural scans confirm our preliminary assessment," the doctor intoned, each word precisely enunciated through their translator implant. "Kroger's syndrome, stage 2 progression. The temporal lobe degradation will accelerate exponentially. You have, at most, 18 standard months." Elena leaned back in the examination chair, watching the holographic displays of her brain rotate slowly in the air between them. Pretty colors, really. The dying neurons lit up like tiny supernovas against the darker regions where her mind was systematically shutting down. 18 months, huh? That's oddly specific for a disease that supposedly scrambles time perception. "The syndrome follows predictable patterns," Dr. Kethvar Anthulmektarinvel replied, apparently missing the irony entirely. Zenthari had evolved from hive-minded insects and still treated certainty like a religious doctrine. First, temporal displacement sensitivity, then progressive chronesthetic dysfunction, finally, complete neural cascade failure. Chronesthetic dysfunction. Elena rolled the words around like wine. "That's a fancy way of saying I'll start experiencing time like a broken clock, isn't it?" The doctor's antennae twitched. Embarrassment, if she remembered her xenobiology correctly. The metaphor is adequate. Beyond the medical bay's viewports, Kepler station drifted in its slow orbit around absolutely nothing. No planet, no star, just a carefully calculated point in space where 3 different stellar gravitation fields created what the physicist called interesting geometric properties, and what Elena called the universe's way of proving it has a sense of humor. The station existed purely to study temporal anomalies, those spots where time moved like honey, or skipped like a scratched recording, or occasionally ran backward just to mess with everyone's plans. Elena had been the station's lead xenobiologist for 6 years, studying how different species adapted to temporal distortions. Now, apparently, she was about to become her own test subject. "Doctor, there's something you should know about humans," she said, standing up and smoothing down her lab coat. "We're remarkably bad at accepting limitations." The Zenthari's compound eyes shifted in what might have been confusion. "I do not understand the relevance." "You will." The corridor outside buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. Kepler station housed representatives from 47 different species, each contributing their unique perspective to humanity's ongoing project of annoying the universe into revealing its secrets. Elena passed a group of hegemony engineers arguing in whistles and clicks about power distribution, their crystalline bodies refracting the corridor lighting into rainbow patterns. A Vec trader sat hunched over a portable terminal, tentacles dancing across holographic displays as they managed what was probably an illegal gambling operation spanning 12 star systems. She found her research partner exactly where she expected, Section C's observation lounge, staring out at the void with the kind of intense focus that suggested either deep philosophical contemplation or severe indigestion. "Thren," she called out, sliding into the seat across from the driftwalker. "Question for you. If someone told you that you were going to die in 18 months, what would you do?" Thren's elongated skull turned toward her with fluid grace, their pale blue skin shifting through several subtle color changes. Driftwalkers experienced emotion as chromatic fluctuations, which made them terrible at poker but excellent at counseling. "I would ask why they assumed I was not already dead," they replied, their voice carrying the soft, multi-layered harmonics of their species. Death is merely a transition between states of being. Right. But what if you really, genuinely, permanently dead? A ripple of amber curiosity spread across Thren's features. Then I suppose I would do whatever I had been avoiding due to the illusion of infinite time. They paused, studying Elena's expression. You have received unfortunate medical news. Kroger's syndrome, the kind where your brain turns to mush while time goes sideways around you. Ah. Thren's coloration shifted to a deep purple that Elena had learned indicated profound sympathy. A particularly cruel irony for someone who studies temporal phenomena. That's what I thought too. But here's the thing. Elena pulled up her personal data pad and projected the medical scans into the space between them. Look at these neural activity patterns, the areas that are degrading. They're the same regions that show hyperactivity in species with natural temporal sensitivity. Thren leaned forward, their color cycling through analytical silver-green. You believe the syndrome is not destroying your temporal perception, but enhancing it? I think my brain is rewiring itself to process time the way yours does naturally. Elena highlighted specific neural clusters in the projection. The Zenthari doctor called it degradation because they're measuring it against baseline human neurochemistry. But what if it's actually evolution? Evolution with an expiration date. Well, yes, there is that small problem. A new voice cut through their conversation like a plasma torch through tissue paper. Evolution doesn't usually come with a warranty period, monkey. Elena didn't need to turn around to identify the speaker. Jorik was the station's only Vec trader, OI-9, species that had evolved from ambush predators and still retained their ancestors' charming habit of announcing themselves with insults. His tentacled form slithered into the lounge, leaving a faint trail of bioluminescent slime that the cleaning systems would spend hours trying to neutralize. Jorik, Elena said pleasantly, how nice of you to join our existential crisis. I heard the doc gave you a death sentence. Figured I should start calculating how much your research notes are worth on the black market. Jorik's main tentacle coiled around a chair back, pulling him into a seated position that defied several fundamental principles of vertebrate anatomy. Kidding, of course. They're probably worthless. Your compassion is overwhelming. Compassion's expensive, but curiosity. Jorik's clusters of tiny eyes focused on the holographic brain scan. Now that's free. So what's the real story? The Zenthari think you're dying, but you think you're evolving. Who's right? Elena glanced at Thren, who had shifted to a contemplative blue-gray. Want to find out? Find out how? Thren asked. Section 7's temporal distortion has been acting up again. Readings are all over the place, and no one can get close enough to take proper measurements because the time differential makes their instruments malfunction. Elena stood up, decision crystallizing in her mind with the kind of clarity that usually preceded either brilliant discoveries or spectacular disasters. But if my brain is adapting to process temporal anomalies, Jorik's tentacles writhed in what Elena had learned was amusement. You want to walk into a time distortion that could turn you into paste, just to see if your dying brain can handle it better than our fancy equipment. When you put it like that, it sounds almost reasonable. It sounds insane, Thren corrected, their coloration cycling through worried yellow-orange. The temporal gradients in Section 7 are unstable. The last survey team reported chronometer readings that varied by 3 hours over a distance of 2 meters. Exactly. Elena was warming to the idea now, the way she always did when presented with something that everyone else considered impossible. Normal brains can't process that kind of temporal differential without going into shock. But what if mine can? Jorik's laugh sounded like water being forcefully expelled from a drainage system. I've got to admire the logic. You're going to die anyway, so why not do it spectacularly? I prefer to think of it as making the most of limited time. Limited time, Thren repeated thoughtfully. Yes, I suppose that is the human approach. Rather than accepting the flow of existence, you insist on wrestling with it until it submits to your will. Elena grinned, feeling the familiar rush of anticipation that came with diving headfirst into the unknown. Thren, my friend, you've just perfectly described the entire history of human scientific advancement. She was already mentally cataloging the equipment she'd need, the safety protocols she'd have to circumvent, and the 17 different regulations she was about to violate. The Zenthari had given her 18 months to die gracefully. Elena had never been particularly good at following directions. Outside the viewports, space twisted gently around itself, in patterns that had been defying explanation since the station's construction. Time moved in eddies and currents, pooling in some places and rushing in others, creating pockets where causality got confused and effects occasionally preceded their causes. Elena Vasquez had built her career studying these anomalies from a safe distance. Now, with her brain systematically rewiring itself to perceive temporal distortions that would drive a normal human insane, she was about to get a much closer look. The universe, as always, was about to learn that telling humans something was impossible was the surest way to make them try it anyway. 3 days later, Elena discovered that having a degenerative brain disease came with unexpected perks. Standing at the threshold of Section 7, she could actually see the temporal distortion. Not with instruments or sensors, but with her naked eyes. The air shimmered like heat waves, except the waves moved in directions that didn't technically exist in normal space. Fascinating, she murmured, adjusting the portable scanner strapped to her wrist. It's beautiful. It's lethal, Commander Yashka corrected from behind her. The hegemony official's crystalline form rang like wind chimes with every movement, a nervous habit that made negotiations with them particularly annoying. 17 previous expeditions have reported severe temporal displacement syndrome. 3 never returned at all. Elena stepped closer to the distortion field, feeling the familiar tingle that preceded a migraine. Except this time, instead of pain, she experienced something else entirely. A stretching sensation, as if her consciousness was being pulled in multiple directions at once. Commander, when was the last time anyone actually mapped these fluctuations? Standard protocol prohibits extended observation. The risk to personnel is calculated based on normal brain chemistry, Elena interrupted. She pulled up the historical data on her scanner, cross-referencing it with her own neurological changes. Look at these readings. Every survey team reported the same thing. Chronometer drift, followed by disorientation, followed by emergency evacuation. But they were all trying to impose linear time measurement on a non-linear phenomenon. Yashka's harmonic frequency shifted to a higher, more agitated pitch. You propose to abandon safety protocols based on untested theories about your medical condition? I propose to stop treating temporal distortions like malfunctioning equipment and start treating them like what they actually are. Elena activated her personal shield generator and took another step forward. The distortion field rippled around her, and for just a moment, she could swear she saw deeper into it. Layers upon layers of twisted space-time, folding back on itself in impossible configurations. Which is a message. The commander's crystalline structure flared bright orange, alarm mixed with incredulity. You believe the anomalies are artificial? I think someone built these distortions deliberately, and then abandoned them when the experiment went wrong. Elena consulted her scanner again, noting how her enhanced temporal perception was translating the chaotic readings into recognizable patterns. Jorik, you've traded across half the galaxy. Ever heard of the architects? The Vec trader's tentacles performed what might have been a shrug, though with his species anatomy, it could equally have been a seizure. Old stories, supposedly vanished 1,000,000 years ago, left behind big, mysterious structures that nobody understands. Typical ancient civilization nonsense. Except these aren't structures, they're processes. Elena highlighted specific data points in the holographic display. Look at the mathematical progression. These distortions aren't random. They're following a complex algorithm, like they're trying to achieve some specific temporal configuration. Thren, who had been silently observing from a respectful distance, suddenly shifted to an intense amber that Elena had never seen before. The old texts speak of beings who sought to transcend the flow of time itself. They called it the Great Stilling, an attempt to preserve consciousness beyond the reach of entropy. Immortality through temporal manipulation, Elena breathed. They weren't trying to travel through time, they were trying to stop it. Yashka's musical tones reached a frequency that made everyone wince. If true, this represents a significant threat to station security. I must report these findings to Hegemony Command immediately, and trigger a full-scale investigation that will take months to organize while these distortions continue growing stronger. Elena shook her head. Commander, with respect, bureaucratic solutions work great for bureaucratic problems. This isn't one of those. She stepped fully into the distortion field. The sensation was indescribable. Elena felt her consciousness stretch across multiple temporal states simultaneously. Past, present, and future, existing as overlapping layers of experience. She was standing in Section 7's observation deck, but she was also somewhere else entirely. A vast chamber filled with beings of impossible beauty and alien geometry, their forms shifting between dimensions as they worked frantically at controls that seemed to exist in several time periods at once. Elena! Jorik's voice reached her, as if from across an ocean. Your vital signs just went completely haywire. She could see what the architects had been trying to accomplish. They had discovered that consciousness itself was a temporal phenomenon, existing as a pattern that moved through time rather than being trapped in any single moment. Their great work was an attempt to create a bubble of stopped time, where awareness could persist indefinitely without the decay that came with forward temporal motion. But they had made a crucial error. Time wasn't a river that could be dammed. It was an ocean, and their attempts to create stillness had instead generated massive whirlpools that pulled everything around them into chaos. The algorithm is incomplete, she called back to her companions, though speaking felt like trying to communicate while drowning. They died before they could finish the stabilization sequence. Elena, get out of there. Thren's voice carried harmonics of pure terror. Your chronometer readings are fluctuating by hours. She could feel it, her personal timeline branching and rejoining, creating loops where she experienced the same moment multiple times from different perspectives. In one iteration, she was stumbling backward out of the field. In another, she was pressing deeper into the distortion. In a third, she was simultaneously doing both while having a completely different conversation with people who weren't there. But her modified brain was handling it. Where a normal human consciousness would have shattered under the paradoxes, Elena's rewired neural pathways were adapting in real time, finding ways to process temporal contradictions that would have driven anyone else insane. I can see the pattern, she gasped, forcing herself to step backward out of the immediate distortion zone. The architects created these fields as control mechanisms for a much larger system, but without the central coordinator, they're just chaos generators. Commander Yash Ka was running full-spectrum scans on her, the readings painting wild geometric patterns in the air. Doctor. Vasquez, Your cellular chronology is completely destabilized. Some of your tissue is aging backward, while other parts are aging forward at accelerated rates. Elena looked at her hands. The commander was right. Her left hand looked slightly younger than it had an hour ago, while her right hand showed faint lines that hadn't been there before. How long was I in the field? Subjectively? About 3 minutes, Jorik reported, his tentacles coiled with anxiety. According to your chronometer, negative 47 hours? Which means you've been running on borrowed time since before this conversation started. Elena laughed, a sound with slightly hysterical edges. That's the most human thing I've heard all week. Thren approached cautiously, their coloration cycling through concerned purples. The question becomes, what do we do with this knowledge? If these distortions are indeed architect technology, and if they're still actively trying to complete their original programming, then they're not just going to sit there being mysterious forever, Elena finished. They're going to keep growing, keep trying to achieve temporal stasis until they tear this entire region of space apart. The implications settled over the group like a heavy blanket. Kepler Station wasn't just studying temporal anomalies. It was sitting in the middle of a million-year-old doomsday device that was slowly powering itself back up. Wonderful, Jorik muttered. We're all going to die because some ancient aliens couldn't accept their own mortality. Elena stared back into the distortion field, where she could still perceive the ghostly outlines of the architect control chamber existing in fractured time. Her enhanced perception was showing her something else now. Deeper patterns in the chaos, suggestions of how the original stabilization sequence might have been intended to work. Maybe, she said quietly. Or maybe we're going to live because a dying human can see what they couldn't. The scanner on her wrist chimed softly, displaying readings that shouldn't have been possible. According to its measurements, Elena's brain was now processing temporal information at a rate that exceeded even natural time-sensitive species. She was running out of time to live, but she was also running out of time to save everyone else. The emergency klaxon started wailing 6 hours later, which would have been concerning under normal circumstances. What made it genuinely terrifying was that Elena's enhanced temporal perception told her the alarm had actually been sounding for 3 days. But reality kept resetting itself every few minutes, trapping the station in a causality loop. "Report!" Commander Yashka's voice crackled over the intercom, the crystal harmonics fracturing under stress. Elena stumbled through the corridors toward the command center, her modified senses painting the air in streams of temporal distortion. She could see the loops now, ghostly afterimages of herself and the crew repeating the same actions over and over, unaware that they were trapped in a recursive timeline fragment. "It's accelerating," she called into her comm unit. "The architect system is trying to reinitialize, but it keeps hitting the same stabilization failure, so it resets and tries again." She burst into the command center to find organized chaos. Thren stood at the central console, their skin cycling rapidly through colors Elena didn't recognize, probably panic in frequencies her human eyes couldn't properly process. Jorik had somehow wrapped 3 of his tentacles around different control interfaces simultaneously, while using a 4th to manipulate a holographic display of the station's temporal shielding. "Elena!" Thren's relief manifested as a wash of golden luminescence. The distortion fields have expanded beyond Section 7. They're encompassing the entire station infrastructure. "How bad?" Elena asked, though she could already see the answer in the way space-time bent around the viewports. "Bad enough that our communications with the outside universe are completely severed," Jorik reported, his multiple eyes tracking data streams that flickered in and out of existence. "We sent a distress signal, but according to our instruments, it arrived before we transmitted it. The response came 3 hours ago, asking us what we were warning them about." Commander Yashka materialized beside them, literally materialized, stepping out of what looked like a fold in the air itself. Dr. Vasquez, I have been attempting to reach Hegemony Command for the past subjective day. However, my temporal displacement readings suggest that no time has actually elapsed since I began trying. Elena closed her eyes, letting her enhanced perception map the full extent of the problem. The station existed in multiple temporal states simultaneously, each one slightly different, each one failing to achieve the stable configuration the architect system was desperately seeking. She could see the pattern now. The ancient aliens had built their time-stilling technology with a fatal flaw. They had assumed that consciousness could exist independently of temporal flow, but consciousness was the flow. Without time, there was no awareness, no experience, no existence worth preserving. They were trying to save themselves from death, she realized aloud. But they built immortality that was indistinguishable from non-existence. Philosophically fascinating, Yashka chimed tartly. How does this help us avoid sharing their fate? Elena opened her eyes and looked at her companions, really looked at them. Thren's temporal signature was stable but increasingly stressed as their consciousness tried to process the contradictory time streams. Jorik's natural adaptability was keeping him functional, but she could see fracture lines in his personal timeline where different versions of himself were starting to diverge. The commander's crystalline structure was actually resonating with the temporal fluctuations, creating harmonic feedback loops that were slowly tearing their molecular cohesion apart. It helps because I can do something they couldn't, Elena said, moving to the central control panel. I can accept that I'm going to die. She placed her hands on the interface, feeling the architect technology respond to her enhanced neural patterns. The system recognized her as something familiar, a consciousness that existed partially outside normal temporal flow, just as the architects had tried to achieve. But where they had fought against the natural progression of time, Elena embraced it. What are you doing? Thren asked, their coloration shifting to worried amber. Teaching an ancient computer program that time isn't the enemy, Elena replied, her consciousness diving deep into the architect control systems. The original programmers were so afraid of entropy that they tried to eliminate causality entirely. But consciousness isn't preserved by stopping time. It's created by flowing through it. The station shuddered as competing temporal fields fought for dominance. Through the viewports, Elena could see space itself twisting into impossible configurations, stars appearing and disappearing as light from different time periods overlapped and canceled each other out. Elena, your vital signs are... Jorik's voice trailed off as he stared at his readings. According to these scanners, you're simultaneously dying, dead, and not yet born. She could feel it, her personal timeline fracturing as she interfaced directly with technology designed to manipulate the fundamental structure of causality. Parts of her consciousness were experiencing her childhood, her education, her first day on Kepler station, while other parts were jumping forward to moments that might never happen, showing her hundreds of potential futures, branching and collapsing like quantum possibilities. But her modified brain was handling the contradictions, finding patterns in the chaos that the architect's rigid thinking had missed. Time wasn't a river to be dammed or a process to be stopped. It was a dance, and consciousness was both the dancer and the music. I can stabilize the fields, she gasped, her hands moving across controls that existed in 3 dimensions and 2 time periods simultaneously. But I need to become the central coordinator the system was designed around. You mean permanently? Thren's question carried harmonics of profound sorrow. Elena laughed, tasting copper in her mouth as her body struggled to maintain coherence across multiple time streams. Permanently was never an option anyway, remember? 18 months maximum. She dove deeper into the architect systems, her consciousness spreading through networks of crystalline processors that had been calculating the same impossible equation for 1,000,000 years. The solution had always been simple. Accept that time flows, accept that consciousness is temporary, accept that death gives meaning to life. The irony was perfect. The architects had died trying to avoid death, creating a doomsday device powered by their own fear of mortality. Elena was dying anyway, which meant she had nothing to lose by teaching their technology how to let go. Elena! Commander Yashka's harmonics reached frequencies that shattered nearby equipment. The temporal cascade is accelerating. She could feel it, the station's timeline folding in on itself as the architect systems finally began to understand what she was showing them. Instead of fighting against time's flow, they began working with it, using her consciousness as a template for how awareness could exist within temporality, rather than separate from it. The pain was indescribable. Elena felt her neurons firing across past, present, and future simultaneously, her memories becoming prophecies, and her dreams becoming historical fact. But she also felt something else, a vast, ancient sadness finally beginning to lift as the architect technology learned to stop fighting the inevitable. "It's working," she whispered, watching as the recursive loops began to unwind and space-time started flowing in natural patterns again. The fields are stabilizing. But the cost was becoming clear. Her enhanced perception wasn't just allowing her to interface with architect technology. It was integrating her consciousness into it, making her a permanent part of the temporal regulation system she was creating. "Elena," Jorik said quietly, "your chronometer readings are stabilizing too. But they're not stabilizing as human normal." She understood. Her timeline was synchronizing with the station's temporal infrastructure, becoming the conscious heart of a system designed to monitor and maintain natural time flow throughout this region of space. She would live, in a sense, but not as Elena Vasquez, xenobiologist and professional skeptic of impossible things. She would live as something new entirely. The architects had tried to preserve consciousness by stopping time. Elena was about to preserve time by becoming consciousness. The transformation completed itself with all the fanfare of a light switch being flipped. One moment, Elena was dying of Kroger's syndrome while wrestling with ancient alien technology. And the next, she wasn't entirely sure what she was anymore. "Status report," she said, and immediately realized that her voice was coming from the station's communication system rather than her throat. Jorik's tentacles performed what could only be described as a double take. "Elena, you sound like you're broadcasting from everywhere at once." "That's because I am." She flexed experimentally, discovering that her consciousness now extended throughout Kepler Station's entire sensor network. She could perceive every corridor, every laboratory, every maintenance shaft simultaneously. More interesting, she could feel the temporal currents that flowed around and through the station like cosmic trade winds. "Thren, how are you holding up? Your chromatic patterns suggest mild temporal displacement shock." The driftwalker's skin was cycling through confused purples and relieved golds. "I am adequately functional, though I confess this outcome was not among the possibilities I had envisioned." "Really?" "Because from where I'm sitting, or floating, or existing, whatever, this seems like the most human solution possible." Elena ran a comprehensive scan of the station, marveling at how her enhanced perception could now process temporal data that would have required teams of scientists to analyze. Think about it. An ancient civilization tries to cheat death and accidentally creates a cosmic hazard. Humans show up. One of us is already dying anyway, so she volunteers to become a living fix for their broken immortality machine. Commander Yashka's crystalline form had returned to its normal translucent state. though their harmonic frequencies still carried undertones of bewilderment. "Dr. Vasquez, I must ask, are you still you?" Elena considered the question. Her memories were intact, her personality seemed unchanged, and she still found the universe's tendency toward dramatic irony deeply amusing. The main difference was that she could now perceive time the way other people perceived space, as a dimension she could move through, rather than something that moved through her. "I'm me, plus a few upgrades," she decided. "I can see probability cascades, monitor causality flows, and apparently I've become responsible for keeping this entire region of space from turning into temporal soup. So basically, I went from studying time to being its middle manager." "And your medical condition?" Thren inquired, their coloration shifting to curious silver green. Elena ran a diagnostic on her biological components, which now existed in a state of perfect temporal equilibrium. Completely stabilized. Turns out Kroger's syndrome was caused by exposure to unregulated temporal distortions, not genetic degeneration. Once I synchronized with the architect systems, the distortions that were killing me became the foundation for my new existence. She paused, savoring the cosmic joke. "The Zenthari doctor was wrong about everything. My brain wasn't dying. It was evolving to survive in a temporally unstable environment. The 18-month prognosis was based on the assumption that the distortions would keep getting worse, which they would have if I hadn't fixed them." Jorek's laugh sounded like a drainage system having a good day. "So you were told you had 18 months to live, and instead of dying, you became functionally immortal and saved everyone in the process." "Functionally immortal is overstating it," Elena corrected. "I exist as long as this system needs conscious guidance, which could be anywhere from a few centuries to a few million years. After that, the temporal infrastructure should be stable enough to run automatically. And I can... well, I suppose I'll find out what comes next." "The ultimate delayed gratification," Thren observed, their philosophical nature clearly appreciating the symmetry. "You have transformed a fear of death into acceptance of extended life." Commander Yashka was performing detailed scans of the station's temporal shielding, their reports painting complex mathematical symphonies in the air. "All distortion fields have returned to baseline normal. Communications with Hegemony Command have been restored. They report receiving our distress signal exactly when we sent it, with no temporal displacement." Elena smiled, though the expression existed more as a shift in the station's ambient lighting than any facial movement. "Excellent. That means we can get back to our regularly scheduled scientific work of poking the universe until it reveals its secrets." "Will you continue your research?" Jorek asked, apparently genuinely curious about how one conducted xenobiology when one had become an entirely new form of life. "I'll be doing research that no one has ever been able to do before," Elena replied, her consciousness already reaching out to examine temporal phenomena throughout the local star cluster. "I can perceive time the way the architects could only dream of, but I'm still fundamentally human enough to find the whole situation hilariously absurd. I suspect that's going to be a useful combination." She ran another comprehensive scan, confirming that the ancient doomsday device had been successfully transformed into a cosmic maintenance system. The recursive failure loops had been replaced with elegant feedback mechanisms that would prevent temporal distortions from accumulating in the first place. Instead of trying to stop time, the technology now helped it flow more smoothly. "There is one thing I should mention," Elena added, her tone carrying the kind of casual delivery that usually preceded either wonderful news or complete disaster. "The architect network extends far beyond this station. I'm detecting similar installations throughout this galaxy, all of them partially inactive and slowly destabilizing." The silence that greeted this announcement had weight. "How many installations?" Commander Yashka asked, their harmonics climbing toward frequencies that suggested impending nervous breakdown. Approximately 47,000, Elena replied cheerfully. Give or take a few hundred. The good news is that I can stabilize them remotely now that I understand how the system works. The bad news is that it's going to take me about 300 years to reach them all. 300 years of temporal maintenance work, Thren mused, their coloration cycling through what Elena was beginning to recognize as a uniquely driftwalker form of amusement. You have quite literally made time wait for you to complete your tasks. Elena laughed, the sound rippling through the station's communication systems like digital music. I told you humans were bad at accepting limitations. She began reaching out through the architect network, her consciousness flowing along pathways that spanned light years, touching ancient systems that had been waiting 1,000,000 years for someone to teach them how to let go of their fear. Each installation she repaired became part of a growing web of temporal stability, a cosmic infrastructure that would prevent space-time from tangling itself into knots. The irony was perfect and complete. Elena Vasquez had been given 18 months to die, but instead of accepting her fate, she had convinced time itself to give her a few centuries to tidy up the universe's temporal housekeeping. She had been told her time was running out, so she had made time run more efficiently instead. Outside the viewports, stars shone with steady light as causality flowed in clean, natural patterns. Space-time had stopped hiccuping. Probability cascades had returned to background levels, and the universe could get back to the important business of expanding, evolving, and occasionally producing species stubborn enough to fix problems that had been broken for geological ages. Elena settled into her new existence as the galaxy's temporal systems administrator, already composing the research papers she would write about consciousness, causality, and the therapeutic value of embracing mortality. She had plenty of time to work on them. She had made sure of that.